So we will be picking up tonight with chapter 4 of 1 Peter. Lord willing, we are going to move through this entire chapter tonight. One of the highlights, we've got a lot of imperatives. We have 9 imperatives that Peter is making known to us, things that are necessary commands. I always like things like that. It makes it very clear because I'm a what do you need to do kind of person. And so these things are very, very clear in that. And we're going to start that off with the very first verse having to do with the mind of Christ. Peter kicks off by saying, therefore. We also have a number of therefores, which pick up from the previous ideas and thoughts and themes that Peter has been laying out all along this pathway up to chapter 4. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. This arm yourselves is one single word in the Greek, and it is a command. He's saying, because he suffered, prepare your minds. This is the imperative. This is not negotiable. This is not like, when you get around to it after you go to seminary. He's telling everyone who's a believer, we have to prepare our minds to be the same in our minds. Arm yourselves also with the same mind, for he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he no longer should live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lusts of men, but for the will of God. Now, this word right here, ceased, it's green, it's bold, the tense is perfect. He who has suffered in the flesh has finished, completed the life in sin. Peter's going to start to express here these things. We're no longer living the way that we used to live. It's a very interesting thing when we consider the time that we have. What we're doing with our life, where it's going, how it's been spent, and, wherever you might be on that spectrum of things, whether you're new in the faith, whether your faith has been kind of spinning its wheels for a while, chances are you're not going to have the limited window of opportunity that a person like the thief on the cross had. He was in a place, unlike a couple of his neighbors and partners, where his mind had already transformed and he was no longer thinking towards the lusts of the flesh. He was orienting his mind towards the same mind of Christ, knowing that he was going to be in paradise, asking, begging, pleading that he might join him in faith. It's interesting to have conversations with people about the time that they do have left. Just like I said earlier, we've got 2 memorials that are taking place this week. And I imagine if you were to ask those families if they had seen those things, if they had expected this season to be the season, if they thought that it might be this time, they probably wouldn't say yes. They probably wouldn't say, yeah, it was really clear. And so my question is, what is it that I'm living for? With the time that I have, with the command that I've been given by Christ, really, really, truly, what is it that I'm living for? And it's one thing to have an idea in our head of what the right answer is. And it's another idea to live a certain life. Like we have a lot to live for. A lot of things to live out eternity presently for. So Peter continues on in verse 3, we have spent enough of our past lifetime in doing the will of the Gentiles. And this here also is perfect tense. He's saying it's finished, it's complete, that life is done. When we walked in, lewdness, lusts, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, abominable idolatries. Technology sometimes shifts things just so. Let me see what I could do to get this back on track. So, the idea of lewdness. I don't know how much of these words were in your vocabulary today or even this week. So just to kind of understand some of these concepts, lewdness is the idea of unbridled licentiousness. That one you probably used this morning. Conduct that disregards social and moral restraint. Lust. Desires, cravings, used broadly across sexual, but also material and appetite. So it's not necessarily just something that fills in one criteria or one category. These are things that we're pursuing and passionate about in all different kinds of areas of life. Drunkenness. Earlier, I believe it was in chapter 1, we talked about being sober-minded, but that was an idea of clarity, of holiness. This right here, he's addressing straight up. In fact, this whole section is going to have a lot of overlap with excess of drinking. This is excess beyond festive drinking. Revelries, carousing, typically associated with festive procession. So this is a group of people that are getting together. They're just having a big old party. And so just to address Oklahoma City real quick, if you're from Oklahoma City, this city's normal. A couple of things I noticed about the city when I came to Oklahoma City. It is massive. It is enormously spread out. It kind of feels like the 5 boroughs just all in one place, all over the place. And there's not really, there's more now than there used to be, but there's not really like the biggest culture of walking and biking and sidewalks. It is a driving city. You drive to go pretty much everywhere. And we don't have these central hubs. So for example, in New York City, we have districts where there would be a meatpacking district, and there would be a flour district, and there are all these different types of districts with things. But that's modern culture in comparison to old world culture. When I was in Italy, we had some of the most wonderful representations of life in these things called piazzas, town squares. Man, the life is rich and full there. The whole idea was we're going to have people that live all around this square, and in the middle, they're going to do life together. So in the mornings, you would have different kinds of markets going on in the square there. You would have food, you'd have flowers, you'd have different things, but everybody is coming together to that square. They're doing life together. In Oklahoma, a lot of times doing life together looks like we have our fortified properties with fences. I've never seen more fences in my life than when I moved to Oklahoma. And then when we leave the fortress, the dungeon gate opens in which the car comes out, and then the dungeon immediately shuts, and that's it. You're off, and it's kind of like Fort Knoxy a little bit. And I say somewhat embarrassed, I don't know most of my neighbors' names. And, some I used to know, and they've moved on, and new ones have come in, and they've moved on, and new ones have come in. And the culture is a little lacking here compared to what Peter's talking about here a little bit. In this culture, people are doing life much, much, much more together. And they have rituals and religions that do things together like this, and those things lead to excesses and corruption from those excesses. So this is a lot of what he's talking about. And I want to address one of these excessive things, one of the ancient festivals, Monsteret. A day tied to religious festival includes citywide celebrations. So just get the visual of that. We have the citywide celebration where identity is expressed through participation in the event rather than devotion to the truth that's even behind it. The streets fill with people who are running together in a shared experience where belonging is measured by how fully you join in. Alcohol floods the culture, becoming the central feature of the gathering. What begins as celebration quickly becomes riot drunkenness, where clarity of mind is replaced by altered judgment. Groups move from place to place, often loudly, drawing attention, creating an atmosphere of public disorder and spectacle. Music, shouting, chanting, and movement create an environment where people are caught up in the moment, becoming riotous, no longer governed by restraint. The celebration is marked by loosened boundaries, where behavior that would normally be considered inappropriate becomes acceptable. Sexual suggestiveness increases. Flirtation becomes aggressive. Modesty diminishes, and sexual encounters became normalized. What would normally be private becomes public and shameless with little concern for honor and consequence. The event creates temporary permission. Everyone is participating. Businesses and surrounding culture capitalize on the moment, reinforcing and amplifying the behavior. Those who are abstained are seen as strange, overly rigid, missing out, disconnected from that community. Participation is not just encouraged, it is expected for social acceptance. The entire environment produces what can only be described as a flood of intoxication, a riot of unrestrained living, a shameless casting off of all moral boundaries. This is what Peter is speaking to and addressing. And this is yesterday. Everything I just described was all taken from the characteristics and some of the good times that we call St. Patrick's Day. Things that are old are still new again. Things that used to take place are still the same. Interestingly enough, as I was going through some of these things, I was trying to research. We hear a lot of, well, I'll just call it. The church doesn't exactly give good press to cults. We hear a lot of things in regards to pagan societies and cults and the goddess Diana and different things like that. And I started to do some research on that and what it looked like. What it looked like to have these temple prostitutes and these different excessive, ecstatic performances and rites and rituals. And the more I dug down, the more I tried to find evidences, to find things, the more I found there wasn't necessarily sacred rites that were performed or sanctioned by these pagan temples. It really was just the licentiousness of the culture, which is really very much like St. Patrick's Day. It's named after and it's following after real, legit, faithful people, and it's become something that totally, completely has to. And look, I'm wearing green too, okay? So I'm not like just trying to like rain on everybody's parade. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm just simply saying, having lived, Oklahoma City's got some St. Patrick's Day stuff. New York has some St. Patrick's Day stuff. And that, I never did anything in the city, but even just on Long Island where I was, growing up in an Irish community and part of many, many pubs after work and everything like that, you couldn't get in to our pub that we went to every night. You couldn't even get in on those days. It was insanely packed. And people were having a very, very, very rich and wonderful time. And Paul is very concerned about us getting caught up in very, very wonderful times from the past. These things that we lived in, these things, look, whenever, let me really, really, really be careful in saying this. Before I was a Christian, and when we would go out together after work and go to the pub, I had really great times and great memories of things like that. It's the closest thing I knew to fellowship. It's the closest thing I knew to family outside of your family. We got to know each other really, really well. I still remember my bartender's name, and we would go out almost as a ritual after work. Sometimes we would get there at midnight, sometimes we would get there at 1 or 2. It didn't matter because they didn't close till 4. There was a very special kind of fellowship that took place there with our drinks and our camaraderie, darts and different types of games and everything like that. It's all I had. It's all they had. Peter is wanting to express there's something different now. Something very, very strong. Something that you're actually going to be noticed amongst that group You're going to be chastised from that group. They're going to come against you. They're not going to feel comfortable with what you're doing and how you're doing it because of how different it is and the offense that it's bringing to their very own culture and their sensibilities. We want to move forward carefully. We want to move forward really carefully with all of this very, very sacred material that Peter is really going to be addressing to this nearly persecuted church that we're talking to. In regards to these things, they think it's strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation. And that's probably a term you guys used with the kids this morning, that flood of dissipation. So we're going to examine that a little bit here too. I really like the NLT on this one. The NLT hit two great home runs for me in this chapter. And here's what the NLT says. Of course, your former friends are surprised when you no longer plunge into the flood of wild and destructive things that they do, so they slander you. It's just that simple. Look, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a big go big or go home guy, and it's always the way I was. So when we went to the bars, it was go big or go home. And if you went big enough, you didn't even remember how you got home. This is a different kind of life. That flood, that word is really specific that he uses there. He's talking about something that just immerses and overcomes and overpowers. I don't know about you guys, but I used to think my faith is strong enough. I could go against that flood. I can stand against that flood. I'll be okay. It's normally people who are usually in the earlier years thinking that and ending up getting caught up in the flood and stuff. And the bottom line is, Peter's saying to stand against it. I'm just saying we have to be really careful. The word flood is used there very, very specifically by Peter, by the Lord, because it does overcome. It does spill out over into everything. It's the reason why St. Patrick's Day is not held in a church. It floods out and spills out into all these other areas. Man, you should see the subways on St. Patrick's Day. Very, very unique Irish smell that's going on down there. Do others notice the difference in your life? Do we live such lives that people are going, what's the deal with you? And if that's the case, then what is it that they would notice? Because everything that we're talking about here is we're talking about living billboards for something that's different. One thing I want you guys to know is let's be really careful not to deceive ourselves about this being the Bible Belt. Those kind of things aren't doing us any favors. Thinking like that, all that. Because here's something that you probably do know. Whether it's you or whether it's someone else, when you see the real thing somewhere, you notice it. You really, genuinely, truly notice it. And just like I was sharing last week with the guy who was in church who broke down and was crying and worshiping God, and I was like, what does that guy have that I don't have? What is that thing? There's things that people do notice and they pick up on. And it's not just, I don't not say certain words, I don't not watch certain things, I don't not drink certain things. Anyone can do that. I did a lot of that when I was an atheist. It's something different. It's something that is not our spirit. Not just debauchery, not just things of the flesh. It's something beyond the flesh that is very alive and very, very powerful. So, these people are going to be speaking evil of you. They will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this reason, the gospel was preached to those who are dead, that they might be judged according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. I spent a little bit of time trying to figure this one out. And is it talking about those who are spiritually dead? Is it talking about those who are already dead? My conclusion is this. We're getting into territory where Peter is saying there's a judgment that's coming. And we have to really, really be concerned about that. These things that are happening right now, these things where people have certain power and they have certain authority and they can do certain things, there's a judgment that's coming. There is a judgment that's coming. Now, you guys, you're going to be judged by those who are alive. And therefore it says, for this reason this gospel was preached to those who are dead. Please don't go back. It did. Okay, don't worry. We're not too far off. For this reason the gospel was preached to those who are dead. And that's the thing where I'm trying to figure out, is this spiritually dead, or is this? And the conclusion I've had is that these are the ones who went before us who are no longer. These are the saints who are now dead. That they might be judged according to men in the flesh. That was in their life. And they may not have just been judged. They may have been persecuted. They may have been killed. But they live according to God in the Spirit. So there is a judgment that's coming. But the gospel was preached for their sake. I'm in that camp. You're in that camp. And there's other people that the Lord intends to be in that camp. But the end of all things is at hand. Is at hand. Green and bold. Perfect tense. Here's what Peter is saying here. The resurrection, which he's already focused on a lot, the resurrection was the inauguration of everything that would be put in motion. That would be the same period of time that we're still in today. We are in this period of the things that are at the end and have been for 2,000 years since the resurrection. The end of all things is here. Therefore, be serious and watchful in your prayers. And those are two imperative commands. So Peter is letting us know our prayers really need to be taken seriously. If you're like me, you might really seriously struggle with prayers. So if we struggle with prayers, if I'm having a hard time keeping track or not thinking about 18 different things that are in my head or weren't in my head until I started praying, and then they all just started falling out of the shelves and out of the closet and everything, there's really serious warfare that goes on when we pray. And I dare say it is exceptionally strong for anybody who's got the ADHD thing going on. Really, really strong stuff. But Peter is saying we have to be serious about what is going on here, and we have to be watchful in your prayers. So when I'm praying, first of all, really cool, the Lord taught me how to pray. You know what I mean? Second, here, just picking up on this, here's some extra add-ons that Peter, who was taught by the Lord, he's saying, this is really how you want to focus on these things. Remember, Peter's really coming to the end of his life based on persecution. The full judgment that is about to come forth from Rome, which Peter's about to talk about, it's right at the doorstep. And here's what he's noticing, and here's what he's encouraging. Above all things, have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. Before we go any further, focus on this one for just a second. Don't raise your hands. Rhetorical question. How many people here got through this whole day without grumbling? I will willingly volunteer myself. Yeah, I just grumbled while we were going through the last couple of verses, and I was having technical difficulties. Be hospitable to one another without grumbling. This is what Peter is saying is necessary for the body, the holiness of the body. I think, just my opinion here for a second. On a typical Sunday morning, you guys might see me. I might be like sort of a bluish streak that's kind of running to and fro and stuff like that. I get around on Sunday mornings. There's a lot that's going on behind the scenes usually. And I listen a lot. Because sometimes while I'm running around, I'll hear something and I'll need to stop and pull back and engage, right? And I have to say, honestly, I don't hear a lot of grumbling here. And I'm not flattering anybody. I'm saying, and I have actually been to churches. I had a dear friend of mine who was a pastor who said, "Can you please come to my church and talk to my people? Because they are bitter people." And I understood what he was talking about. We had met and had fellowship a few times. Every one of us probably grumbles at different points and everything. But Peter is saying that's not what the Lord is calling his church to be. So as a standard, we're going to keep ourselves from that kind of mindset. But that's just like the That's the little bow at the end. We're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about what love does. I have to give a shout out to a dear friend of ours whose name is Patrick up at Calvary Chapel, Wichita. He introduced me to this mindset, not just a saying, but a mindset. As a pastor, he asks himself a question, and he also presents this question to the church. What does love do here? In regards to a specific situation, a scenario, a problem, whatever it might be, he consistently asks the question, what does love do here? And without even getting to this chapter, a couple of weeks ago, I just sent him a text and I thanked him for that phrase. I thanked him for that philosophy because I caught myself renewing my mind in it. And it's something that we went over a couple of years back, and I wrote it down on a piece of paper. I said, what was that you just said? And I wrote it down because I think it was second nature to him. And if love covers a multitude of sins, man, we should be thinking, what does love do here? A lot. Probably on an everyday sort of basis. With our kids, with our marriages, with our coworkers, with all these situations, what does love do here? What does that mission of love look like? So I want to talk about different loves because love is also contextual. For example, a parent might love their 8 different kids, but that love might look different with those 8 different bodies, those 8 different souls, those 8 different minds, those 8 different habits and skill sets and everything else. Love is going to look different. So we have the 4 loves. We have phileo, which is affection and loyalty among equals. We have eros, which is romantic and passionate love. We have storge, which is family love, natural bonds. And one thing I want to mention is in the New Testament, phileo is a big one. Agape, we also know, is a big one. That's number 1 in the number of times it's used. Phileo is number 2. Storge is actually not even, it's a compound version of storge that exists like 1 time, I think. But it does exist, and it's the idea of familial love. And then we have eros, which is not written in the New Testament, but it is implied and it's represented. And it's certainly in the Septuagint with the Old Testament. So we have that idea of loves. But then we have the big one. We have agape. Right off the bat, this is the driving and sacrificial nature of love. I've really done crazy deep dives on this word for like 10 years now, talking to scholars and doing my own research and investigation, everything, because when we simply say that's God's love, that's unconditional love, it can squash it down into something that undermines some of the qualities and characteristics of it. And so here's 10 attributes of it. Not that it's going to exhaust it, but it gives a little bit more flavor. It is volitional, which means it's a deliberate act of the will. It is not based on emotions. This will make a lot of sense sometimes when it comes to your teenage children, and your emotions can be in a lot of different places with your teenager. But when it comes to what is necessary, that act of the will towards them, that is what we're talking about. It is driven. It is compelled to move. There is pursuit, consistently oriented towards the object. Unilateral. It operates independent of merit or reciprocity. So it's not going to be based off of what you do or what we do together or how much of a good time we're having. That's more phileo. Deliberate, carefully weighted choice and decision. Enduring. It is patient and persistent regardless of the circumstance. Beneficial. It seeks the good of the beloved, not their preference. That's that thing that's contextual I was talking about. Like a little kid will be like, if you love me, you'll let me have ice cream. And the parent's like, no, I do love you. That's why you can't have ice cream. Costly, willing to sacrifice comfort, safety, or rights. Selfless, what I am able to give for their increase and growth. And then outcome, measured by effect on the other, not intensity of feeling. So the thing is, like, I want increase for them. I want benefit for them. I want to invest in them for those things. So Some of these things describe the nature of agape. And when we think about what that looks like, that God has for us, it helps give a complete picture that makes sense in a lot of different areas. But let's take a look at how important agape is and what things look like with and without it, because we have those other loves. Agape is the standard that governs all other expressions of love. So, for example, eros without agape can look like lust. Phileo without agape looks like preference. I like this friend, I don't like that one. Storge without agape can look like tribalism. Now, with agape, eros looks like covenantal intimacy, what God designed to be good. Phileo looks like faithful brotherhood that is stretched, that is tested, that is resilient. Storge, family, looks like a spiritual family. So agape has that durability. And when we think about where he says, love will cover a multitude of sins, when we think about all those attributes, we think about all those things coming together, it's a rescue mission constantly. We are in that business of loving in a rescue type mission for others. Verse 10 says, sit down for a minute, because this is maybe my favorite part of this whole section. As each one has received a gift, minister it to one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. It doesn't say, hey, did you guys check your mail? Because gifts went out and some of you guys got them and some of you guys didn't. No, it says, as each one has received a gift. And we're going to talk about some of these things. We're going to talk about that word and a bunch of things. So let's break it down. First and foremost, each one. The Greek heketos, every single person, every single one of us. There's no exceptions. Everyone has purpose, function, role, and contribution in God's plan. Everyone here. That's like one of my favorite parts. Everyone here has received a gift. This is where we have to unpack this word a little bit. The word is charisma. It comes from the root word charis, which is the word for grace. The idea is the gift that you have received is a measure of grace. You have received grace from God. That's a gift. Special grace, special gift, special purpose, special to you. This, my first thought, because black and white mind and how this gets sorted and everything, my first thought is, okay, well, I've got my spreadsheet of all the spiritual gifts that I pulled from every single chapter and verse from the Bible. I've done the Greek words, the Strongs on it. I've found them all. I've collected them. I've sorted. But that's not what it's saying here. It's not saying these things are limited to those spiritual gifts. This is grace. That was important. I've never even understood it and seen it like that before. Each and every person has been assigned a specific expression of God's grace, is the idea behind this. This includes recognized spiritual gifts like we talked about. This could be a role in ministry. This could be spirit-enabled capacity, maybe a person who is particularly gifted with encouragement or generosity or some kind of love. But also situational empowerment of his grace, faith, wisdom, discernment in the moment. So it doesn't just have to be locked into something the way that my brain might think sometimes. But what is that manifold grace? What does that look like spilled out with all the different types of reflections of that from everyone in the room? And man, I tell you what, I have a pretty good vantage point of this room. And I know this crowd pretty well. And for some of you guys, I have spent enough time with to not only have seen and tasted, but maybe even been blessed by some of that grace. And others, maybe I haven't spent enough time with. But maybe with others, maybe not feeling so clear and free. in some of those things. And that's what I really, really am hoping for tonight, for these things to really begin to come out. The next part is to minister it to one another. That's what I'm talking about. Diakoneo, that word that we have for servants, and you might have ever heard the term deacon. Servants. To serve and to wait on, to supply that grace where needed. This can look like signing up for a ministry. This can look like just being available for what God wants to do in those margins. I was talking to somebody recently about our hallways and mentioning how sometimes our hallways are like, those are like the express shuttle to mission fields. You never know who's walking down that hallway, right? And all of a sudden you might run into somebody, and then the Lord starts to move the conversation beyond just it was crazy cold this week, right? It was hot the other week, and then it got really cold. We start moving into better conversations, deeper conversations. Man, I tell you this with joy. I've seen people cry in those hallways because our church loves, because God uses grace to minister to other people. And the idea where Jesus says, freely you received, freely give. One thing I want to challenge us with, if you guys are like me, and you've been sizing up the things we've been covering already, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm good here, right? Because I do this, or I do that, or I'm already... Let's not think that way. Let's think of how the Lord wants us to think towards new opportunities, new things he's calling us to. Increase. That's Jesus' department. Then we look at as good stewards. So it's kind of interesting that Peter has to say that, right? He doesn't just say do it as a steward. No, he says good. Do it as good stewards. You can imagine Peter has seen a lot of things in his day. He knows what it looks like when a person's really after it. Think about how Peter was, right? How after it he was. And think about how Peter might be dealing with the next generation or the generation after that. And looking and being like, man, these guys are missing something. They're lacking something. He says, I want you guys to be good stewards. What does a good steward look like? How does a good live, think, and act, whatever that means? Why is God saying this? What happens if I don't freely give? The idea is the gift of grace is meant to flow from you. So we've all been given this gift of grace. But God intended it so that that gift of grace was something that was to permeate his church, where we went, how we went. So for example, if you're at a particular event, that measure of grace is at that particular event. God's got you there. He's this orchestral master that's working out all the different sounds and instruments and everything that he's putting together. That's why I get really excited about believers' meetings and why we have that little talk where it's like, hey, this is not the spectator night. This is the night where you get to share in the measure of grace that the Lord has given to you. And everyone has been given these things. And then we get to that manifold thing. Poikilos. Multicolored, multifaceted, diverse. The easy way to explain this one, do they still have crayons? I don't even know if they still have crayons anymore. But we grew up with crayons, right? We had those 64 packs. Maybe you were on the other side of the tracks where you had like the 120, whatever. So I was always super excited when I got the fresh pack, every year. And you get that beautiful picture where it's like it blends the greens and the yellows into the next thing, into the next thing, into the next thing. That's the idea of manifold. Manifold is that spectrum. What does the spectrum look like of God's grace? This thing, if you track down Ephesians chapter 1, you'll see, and this is homework, challenge. See if you can find the meaning of life from Ephesians chapter 1. I believe I have found it, and I believe it is found in verse 5 or 6 or something like that, and it is to the praise of the glory of his grace. The whole thing, it all exists to the praise of that grace, which is glorious. Well, we're dispensers of the manifold grace of God. Every single person in here uniquely and specially. Some of the things that might look like, teaching, for example, like this right here. This should be grace instructing. Serving should be grace that's helping. Encouraging should be grace that's strengthening. Giving should be grace that's providing. Leading should be grace that's guiding. And on and on and on to many, many things. But the grace of God that's moving and empowering and equipping and doing everything. Each believer reflects different aspects and qualities of grace. That is the idea here. What does grace do here? We have the question of what does love do here? It really does make sense for us to start thinking, okay, Lord, I've been given it. I've been called to it. I'm here with it. What does grace do here? What has God given me? Where is his grace evident in my life? Am I actively using it for others? Who is being impacted by my stewardship? The idea of that is the amount that I've been given, that he intended for that to be unleashed into this world. Where am I withholding what God has given? What does grace do here? If anyone speaks, let him speak as the oracles of God. If anyone ministers, as with the strength which God supplies, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belong the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Anybody speak with the oracles of God this morning? New Living Translation to the rescue. Do you have the gift of speaking? Then speak as though God himself were speaking through you. Do you have the gift of helping others? Do it with all the strength and energy that God supplies. So sweet, so simple. Then everything you do will bring glory to God through Jesus Christ, because all glory and power to him forever and ever. Amen. Two categories that Peter presents here. It's for a reason. If you think about it, all things fall into one of these two categories. Speaking covers prophecy, teaching, exhortation, evangelism, word of wisdom, word of knowledge, tongues, including interpretation. Serving, we have helps, we have mercy, we have giving, administration, leadership, healing, miracles. And there's probably other things. This is a pretty good list, though. Everything falls into two different categories. And so when Peter says, hey, when you speak kingdom-focused, centered kind of conversations, do it with the stuff that God has given you, like he sent you. And when you're helping, don't just do it based on what you can do and everything like that. Think how the Lord is equipping and sustaining. I want to talk about the first century church, the Calvary Chapel of Rome. Earlier tonight, I had to throw this in while we were worshiping. We sung, every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. And I want to take this from the first century Calvary Chapel of Rome. I want to look at that church here for just a second. I want to think about some of these things that Peter is writing to and what they're facing and everything else, because we face slightly different things. Our evangelist proclaimed, we are the light sent by God. He was burned alive to light the street at night. One of the men who serves alongside you was questioned why he refused to burn incense to Caesar. They beat him in front of everyone until he collapsed. A couple from your church was arrested during a prayer gathering. Their seats are empty now. No one has heard from them. One of your church families owns a small business. People stopped coming as soon as it became known they followed Jesus. They are now struggling to feed their children. People in your city began talking about your church. They say you worship idols and believe in cannibalism. A young woman from your church was taken by authorities. They told her she could go home if she denied Christ. She never came home. Your pastor was taken away. You heard he was put on a ship and sent far away. We are still waiting on who will take his place. One of your friends was arrested and questioned. They tortured him to force him to deny Jesus. As I'm going through this, I want you guys to just think about how we had prayer requests for people in our church earlier today, real things that were happening. And think about these being very real things that might be happening to congregations and churches, our brothers and sisters in different places of the world. The governor announced executions. One of the names was someone you had just prayed with days before. A family in your church lost everything. Their home and belongings were taken. They are now staying with others in the church. You heard shouts in the city. Later you found out it is believers from your church. They are being fed to animals in the arena. Someone in your church was in the arena that day. They are greatly struggling with what they saw. One of the children's teachers was crucified outside the city. People walked by and mocked her as she died. Others from your church were taken to forced labor. You know they will likely never return. Your church no longer meets openly. You gather quietly in smaller groups at different times. Someone new joins your gathering. No one knows if they are truly a believer or sent to report you. When someone is arrested, helping them could mean you are next. Families in your church have been separated. Children are now being raised by others. Some in your church have denied Christ under pressure. Others have remained faithful and suffered greatly. Every time you gather, you count who is there, and you also count who is missing. And we also sang tonight, prepare our hearts, O God. Help us to receive. I want us to think about what this church was receiving. What they were receiving from the world, what they were receiving from God. Help us to receive. Break the hard and stony ground. Help our unbelief. Plant your word down deep in us. Cause it to bear fruit. Open up our ears to hear. Lead us in your truth. Show us Christ, show us Christ. O God, reveal your glory through the preaching of your word until every heart confesses Christ is Lord. We're the new kids on the block. We're the 21st floor of the 2,000-year-old building that the Lord has been building. Sometimes pastors have some very serious prayer requests because their roof is leaking, because their air conditioner went out. Brothers and sisters, these are real. You know, that's legit, that's real. But when I think about how distant we are from some of those realities, and when I think about how weak that makes my faith, so much more of our faith can be circumstantial. If these bad things happen, then there's no God. Or if these bad things happen, why, God? I don't understand you, and I don't know that I trust you anymore. And the church was forged. I'm talking the church, the first century church, it was forged in the joy and the blood of the saints, starting with Christ himself, who we covered last week, who we're going to cover again this week. It can be hard for us to be distant from these things, to not make the connection that Peter's even talking about. Lord, help us if our Wi-Fi goes down. Saying all that, Peter is now going to go into this section, and he starts off with beloved. He's talking to his kids now. My children, my dear ones. I don't want you to, just imagine talking to your own kids who are about to face these things I just covered. I don't want you to think it's strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you. As though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Rejoice is not an option. It's one of the 9 imperatives. It's our dad here who's leading his kids and saying, you have to orient your mind rightly. If you're not thinking rightly, that's the whole thing from the very beginning of this. If you're not thinking rightly when these things come up, you're going to be confused. You're not going to know what's going on. The enemy is going to take hold of this. I don't want you to think it's strange. It's interesting because before he uses that same language, they think it's strange. He was talking about the non-believers. When they see us, they think it's strange when you're doing this stuff. Now he's saying, I don't want you to think this is strange. This is our normal. This is what it looks like. This is what Christianity looks like. Guys, I think actually what we have is abnormal. Based on everything that we see and everything that we read, we are living a really different kind of version of the church than what Peter's talking about. He says, if you are reproached for the name of Christ, blessed are you, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. On their part, he is blasphemed. On your part, he is glorified. What part? The part where I'm standing firm in peace and strength, regardless of what they say. Earlier, when we were covering 1 Peter, we were talking about how do we deal with things when people say things about us? Do we get rattled? Does it affect our thoughts? Or do we have that wired now? Do we have that figured out? Have we set our minds like Peter's talking about? Because it's one thing for people to rattle us with, sign language while we're driving, when they're doing, you know what I mean. But it's a whole other kind of thing when a person says, are you not worshiping Caesar? Have you given in to these false gods and this cannibal that is Jesus? Let none of you suffer as these things, a murderer, a thief, an evildoer. Let's hold off on busybody for a second. Murderer, right? Don't do that. And if you do, like in your servant time and everything like that, you brought it on yourself. But also, Jesus clarified what murder looks like in our heart. Don't be that guy. Or that girl. A thief. An evildoer. These things can be very regular. They don't have to be something that we find at Folsom County Prison. These are everyday kind of things. And then, in the conversation of murderer and thief and evildoer, those busybodies. Men, get your act in order. Stop talking about the other guys at the water cooler. Ladies, let's be mindful about the business of other people. See, here's just, like, if we just think about what God gave us with the manifold grace and everything, that's what he wants us to be busy about. That's the mission, that's the purpose. But other people's business and everything like that, for the sake of knowing, and this, like, that's not us. Yet, if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him glorify God in this manner. Earlier, as I was going through Peter, I was also dealing with a real-life situation with someone in the church, and it was a person who felt shame because of a certain situation and integrity and things that they were trying to do right, but they ended up feeling great shame as a result of it. We're talking like breaking down, tears, shame. And I was thankfully in this, and I said, hey, wait a second. The Lord is not wanting you to have shame for anything that you're doing. Anything you're suffering from, anything you're going through, anything that would possibly be embarrassing. Think about how the Lord was reduced from the King of Kings to a worm of a man. how he was left in basically underwear in front of everyone, and what he dealt with and what he was exposed to, and the humiliation which was his glory. If anyone here feels like there are some things that they have shame in because they've been reduced also, Peter is there. Peter's letting us know that there's no one who should be ashamed for anything that they're going through for Christ. But let them glorify God in this. Understand, orient yourself towards what God is doing. This is a moment and an opportunity to glorify God. And that's so much of this. These situations, these circumstances that we find ourselves in, so many of these things are going to be testing. They're going to be trying us. What our faith looks like and how we glorify God in it. And that's why he goes on to say, for the time has come for judgment to begin at the house of God. That time is kairos, not chronology. It's time, but this is an opportune time where judgment is going to begin. I had a hard time with that one, straight up. I'll just let you know. I was trying to figure this out and wrestle with this because we're not called and appointed unto judgment. Do some research on this. I found out some very interesting things. There are places in the New Testament where Christians are actually referenced in regards to judgment of God, and the language it's speaking of is discipline. Not condemnation judgment, not guilty verdict judgment. But look, if you've got kids, there's going to be some times when there's judgment which has to do with how they're behaving, how they're carrying themselves, and a loving parent disciplines. The judgment that we're talking about here is a certain kind of trial, a certain kind of discipline. It begins with the house of God, and if it begins with us first, what will be the end of those who do not obey the gospel of God? This was a great place to pull 1 Corinthians 11:31 and 32. It says, for if we would judge ourselves, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord, that we may not be condemned with the world. It's exactly what he's talking about. There is this chastening from the Lord that is different than the condemnation. And the Lord is not wanting us to have that same condemnation. He's chastening us for that very purpose. Albert Barnes has a great quote on this: the severe trial which would determine character. That's what's going on here. Now, if the righteous one is scarcely saved, where will the ungodly and the sinner appear? Therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God commit their souls to him in doing good, as to a faithful Creator. So, therefore, let those who suffer according to the will of God, if we're suffering as God has laid out and planned for this trial, for this testing, this last imperative here, commit your souls to him in doing good. This is where I went the other direction with God. I got wishy-washy. I didn't like what this team looked like. Things got hard, and I said, no way. He's saying, double down. Show your faithfulness. Commit. And he goes on, as to a faithful Creator. And the idea of that, the same way that how you express faith is trust. As to a trustworthy Creator. I'm trusting God with this. I'm trusting God with my soul. I know I can. I know he's got a plan in this. I know he's going to be glorified in this. Let's pray. Lord, I think this chapter is, it's too much for me to understand. There's too many things that are going on here that supersede my eyes and my understanding. And so I can't help but think I want to be praying for the trials and hardships that I know are going on around the world, that I know are going on in our very own church family, but the ones that are especially testing of our faith, challenging us. And Lord, for anyone who is dealing with something that is causing our faith to really be challenged and let's just say maybe it's not well. I just want to take a moment, Lord, and I want to pray. I want to ask for you to be leading, for your Spirit to be calling and beckoning for truth to come into our ears and into our hearts, for it to bring transformation. Everything that Peter is presenting here is for the sake and the hope of transformation, not how long they could endure of themselves, but how much they could be transformed, so that when these hardships and when these trials hit, it only reflected your glory. It only reflected the resilience that you've put in them by the power of your grace. And I want to ask, Lord, for that grace. I want to ask for the things that you are doing in this room, in our church, in your church, in the lives of your people. And I want to pray, Lord, that you would be glorified by the manifold giftings that are in our body, that are in the church. And I want to pray also for those things to increase, for those things to come to a greater faithfulness and opportunity. I want everyone to know their purpose in the church, what you've made them for, so that we can be a very healthy body as you intend. And I want to pray for strength and courage, Lord. Sober-minded for these things that are ahead. In Jesus' name, amen.